All right, first, a quick hello. I'm James O'Reilly. I am a developer relations engineer at Google. I work on the Firebase studio team, and I'm a big fan of building cool things with code. But like many of you, I'm always looking for tools that let me spend less time fighting and configuring and more time creating. And that's actually what we're going to talk about today. Here's a quick look at the agenda. I'll leave it up on the screen for a second for you to take a glance. All right, let's start with a show of hands. Who here has ever lost maybe an hour's worth of time, maybe an afternoon, just trying to get a new project started, right? With configuration. Yeah, me too. You're cloning a repo. You're installing dependencies, and suddenly you're in the ninth circle of dependency hell, right? It's a universal developer experience. We've all been there, staring at that error message. It makes no sense because some package somewhere that you didn't even know you were using has a conflict. That initial friction that you're experiencing is the setup tax. It's a silent killer of productivity. And let's be honest, your enthusiasm. And this leads us to the most infamous phrase in all of software development. It gets you in that defense. When QA files that bug, right? You know what I'm talking about. It's enough to even make this capybara lose his chill. It works on my machine, right? We've all said it, we've all heard it. And while it's funny, it points to a fundamental problem. Our development environments are fragile, inconsistent, and a massive source of works here, not there bugs. This isn't just a meme, it's a symptom of a deep-seated issue in our workspace. But beyond setup, there are other obstacles we need to face. Every new app needs authentication, database, navigation. We're writing scaffolding over and over. And now there's this new frontier of generative AI. We all want to build apps with generative AI, but it adds a whole new layer of complexity. How do we manage the API keys securely? How are we wiring up the agentic workflow? There's a mountain of setup before you write your first line of code. What if you could just skip all of that? What if you can just remove these obstacles? Enter Firebase Studio. It's an agentic, cloud-based environment that helps you build and ship production quality software, which includes mobile apps, APIs, backends, front ends, you name it. This is what Firebase Studio looks like. It probably looks very familiar to you if you're using Visual Studio Code. It's entirely web-based. So you go to a URL, and you're using your development environment. It's built on Visual Studio Code or Code OSS. So it's incredibly familiar to you, and you can bring with you your extensions that you're using in Visual Studio Code, the muscle memory you have with using the environment. Now, it's important to note that this is a VM running in the cloud. So you're not limited to just what can happen in a browser. It's running on Linux in a virtual machine. Now, one of the major challenges with developing on the web, especially for mobile apps, is testing your app. So we have a built-in Android emulator to go alongside with your web-based previews. So you can do both web-based previews and Android-based previews. We've also got several integrations that make adding Google APIs easier. You can add things like Google Maps API, Gemini API, configure Firebase hosting or Cloud Run. The choices for those installations are really easy for you right within the environment. And just about every Google Surface in 2025 has Gemini built in. So we're going to take a deeper dive into Gemini in a little bit, but just so you know, it's built into the experience to help troubleshoot errors, develop code, and we're going to look at that. And finally, we're actively working on a real-time multiplayer mode. So you will be able to pair program with other developers through the cloud, just like you would with a Google Doc or a Google Sheet. At the heart of Firebase Studio is a single file called dev.nix. If you're working on a team with other contributors, you can customize your environment, your workspace exactly the way you want, and then share that configuration with others by committing this file in your repo, so that when you share that repo and another developer launches it, it will use this dev.nix file to set up their environment exactly the way you want. I really love how David East at Google puts it. He says this is the equivalent of a package.json file, but for your environment. The dev.nix defines just about everything you need to work in your app and run it in the cloud. From system packages and services like compiler toolchains and local database servers, to IDE extensions, to specific wiring needed to boot up your front end and back end servers automatically so you can preview your app while you're writing code. It's all defined in this one single file. And it's important to note that this is built on an open source Nix ecosystem. So there's a massive community enabling software to run in it. Let's take a look at an example Nix file. It starts off by defining the Nix channel. Now, this is important here because by defining this specific channel, stable-24.05 in my case, you're locking the workspace to a very reproducible environment. You come back to this in 2 years, it's still the same environment. Next, we add in the system packages that you want to run in this environment. In my example, I'm running JDK 17 and Unzip. These will be pre-installed in the workspace when anybody starts up. Next, we're setting a few environment variables. Here I just have port and host. You can imagine the environment variables you need. One important caveat here is this file gets committed to Git, like I mentioned already. So you're not putting API keys that are sensitive in this location. There are other ways where you would store that in your environment. Next, the IDE extensions you want pre-configured. So because everybody's going to be working in the same IDE environment, you could start off the developers with pre-installed extensions. Now, these extensions are the same extensions you would expect in Visual Studio Code. However, to be clear, they're coming from OpenVSK, which is another marketplace, not the official VS Code marketplace. But when developers launch extensions, they're typically deploying to both marketplaces dually. Now we have lifestyle hooks. These lifestyle hooks are specifically about the IDE the IDX workspace that you're configuring. Here I have on create lifecycle hook. This is a great lifecycle hook if you wanted to, say, seed a database with mock data for the developer to start with. In my particular example here, I'm just configuring it to launch the README file in the editor. So when the IDE launches up, they see the README file first. The second lifestyle hook is on start. On start is not shown in this example, but it's very useful if, say, you're running multiple backend servers in your environment and you wanted to spin them all up for the developer right away. You would include that in the on start lifecycle hook. And speaking of which, this preview section. The preview section defines which previews you want available to your application, and we currently have two. There's a web preview and an Android preview. The Android preview is an emulator, so it's running in Linux. This is not a browser-based interpretation of an emulator. It's from Android Studio. If you're building a framework or a library, Firebase Studio workspaces are extremely useful to you because what you can do is include this Nix file in your repository, and when you have documentation on how to use your library, you can have a try it now button that automatically launches Visual Studio with the exact environment you want, configured the way we just talked about. And the developer doesn't have to think about setting up their environment just to start trying out your SDK or whatever service it is you're providing, because their environment is set up exactly the way you wanted it. You can create custom templates and share those custom templates online in a repo, as well as like a starter environment for developers using your service. Now, there's a lot more to dev.nix, and we have a lot of information on this online. Take a look at this blog. David East has a great video on it as well, if you wanted to take a look at that. Now let's talk about how Firebase Studio's tight integration with Gemini can actually accelerate your development. Going beyond just code assist, it's great with rapid iteration. So Gemini is built right into the IDE, and it's available to you right in a panel where you can start engaging with Gemini to help you build your application. Firebase Studio has more than 60 built-in templates, including one for Flutter, which I'm launching here. There's also a collection of community templates, so you can find a large repository of templates online to help get you started. So this workspace is launching. You'll see it's very familiar. It's Visual Studio Code. I'm choosing to install the Dart extension here. And as soon as this Dart extension finishes installing, you'll see the code preview, and then I have the emulator preview, and then Gemini on the side. Just wait for the app to launch. So now here's the app running in the emulator in your workspace. So using Gemini, here's an example of us using Gemini through a conversation where I want to iterate on the application by adding a feature. Right now, there's a plus button to increment the counter. I'm asking Gemini here, well, let's add another button to decrement the counter. I have that conversation. Gemini generates the feature. As a good engineer, I evaluate the code, which is showing me a Git diff of what it did. This is not only good for validating that it did it correctly, but also learning what it did, so you're very familiar with the code base as you're building it. I liked the change. I accepted it. Now I'm trying it out. And as I click that button, the feature actually worked. So we can go a little bit past this. And now that the feature is built, we can ask Gemini, well, let's write a test for that feature. So that's what I'm doing here. I prompted it to write a unit test, and it is going to create that function. I evaluate it again before committing it. I accept the changes. And after accepting the changes, I take a look at the code and I run the tests right away to see, are the tests functional? Are they working? So here I'm running the test, and you can see in the bottom right-hand corner the results of that test. And the test's passed. It was a simple test, but it gives you the idea of how you can interact with Gemini to accelerate your development. Flutter Fire. So Flutter Fire is a set of Flutter plugins which connect your Flutter application to Firebase. Now the plugins are individual per Firebase product. So you can import specifically which products you want to work with. If you want to work with Cloud Firestore, you want to work with authentication, you can very easily bring in those plugins because Flutter Fire is already implemented into Firebase Studio. And since it's multi-platform, these plugins work across Android, iOS, and the web. So installing it, you're sure to know that your implementation is going to work across these platforms. The first thing you would do is you would import the core plugin. You would import the core plugin, and then you would configure your project running Flutter Fire configure. This would generate a configuration file for your application, which we will import into the project. So in our project, we're importing the core library, and then we're importing that configuration we just created. After that, we are initializing using that configuration, and it pulls from the current platform. Once it's initialized, then you're ready to run the application. On its own, Firebase Core provides just basic functionality for Firebase, but you would need to install individually the plugins for each of the products and services you wanted to use, like Crashlytics or Cloud Firestore. Each one of them is available for you. Additionally, we have Firebase AI Logic. Now, Firebase AI Logic allows you to make these generative AI calls directly from your client SDK without needing to have a backend server to do it. And it does so securely. So if you wanted to implement features like AI chat experiences, image generation, function calling, streaming input or output, you don't need to worry about standing up, hosting a backend service. You can do this using the AI Logic SDK. For more complex AI workflows, you can still use server-side logic, but you would do that through GenKit and not AI Logic. Let's take a look at an example. First, we import the Firebase AI and Firebase Core packages. Also, we import that configuration file we generated earlier. Next, we initialize Vertex AI, Gemini API backend service with an AI model. In my case, for this example, I'm using Gemini's 2.5 Flash, but you can choose a different model that you wanted to use. Then you initialize Firebase with your app's configuration. Then we're defining a text prompt. In my case, I'm asking it to write a very short story. Then we ask it to generate output, giving it that prompt. And when we receive that output, here we have the very short story that it generated. Now, you can also do multimodal. And in this example, we'll take a look at that. So in this example, I'm changing the model because I want to use multimodal. I'm changing the model to Gemini 2.0 Flash preview image generation, which will help me have the ability to generate images. As before, I am still generating a text prompt. In this case, I'm asking it to generate an image of the Eiffel Tower. And when I get back the response, I get back the multi-part response and can pull the image from that response. And that's it. That's Firebase Studio in a nutshell. It could really help accelerate your Flutter development. It could help you define consistent, reliable workspaces for your team to work on. It could enable you to create consistent, reliable workspaces to share with the public if you want them to experiment with a product or service you're offering, because you can pre-configure that workspace, and by providing a button link, they can launch the workspace and be up and running very quickly. You can use the power of Gemini to iterate on your application development. As you saw, it's a lot more advanced than just code assist. You can ask it to help you generate a feature. You can ask it to help generate unit tests or whatever you think of. That's my time. Thank you very much. If you have questions, I will be around and mostly spending my time at the booth right there. Please come up and ask questions. I'm happy to have a conversation. Thank you very much.